All right. The Visiting Artist Program, funded by PAFA's graduate program, brings an outstanding roster of local, national, and international artists to PAFA each semester for lectures, critiques, and workshops. The program exposes students and the public to a range of artistic approaches and fosters discussion about contemporary art and ideas. This afternoon, we are pleased to have Katty Huertas joining us. Katty Huertas is a multidisciplinary artist and designer born in Colombia and based in the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore area. She holds a BA in art from FIU and an MFA in graphic design from MICA. Her work explores identity, folklore, and double standards, among other subjects. She combines analog and digital mediums such as painting, sculpture, fiberwork, book arts, digital, drawing, and animation. Katty's work has been shown in galleries in New York City, San Francisco, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Austin, Bogota, Colombia. Bogota, Colombia. Her client list includes the New York Times, the Washington Post, Nickelodeon, Red Bull Music Academy, BuzzFeed News, and the Women's March. Besides her independent practice, Katty currently works as an editorial designer and illustrator at NBC's Today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Katty. You may now start sharing your screen.
All right, let me share my screen. Hope everyone can see and hear me.
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. Awesome. So first of all, thank you so much for coming and for having me here. I know we've been doing so much Zoom this past year, so I know it's hard and it's not easy. So I appreciate you all for being here. My name is Katty Huertas, and I was born in Colombia, and I moved to the US when I was 19. So I often have trouble in how I introduce myself because I am a multidisciplinary artist, and that's how I describe myself now. As the intro mentioned, I'm interested in very different subjects like animation, painting, illustration, design, and knitting. And it made me so happy to know that some of your programs are multidisciplinary too, because I feel like we are often told to like just pick one lane and stay with it. But throughout my career, I felt that having these multiple skills has made me able to create some of the work that I'm most proud of and work with clients that like I dreamt of working with before. So I'm going to show you some of my early work that is nowhere in my website or nowhere to be found, just to show you how I got here. So I started my education in Colombia. Usually school there is shorter, so we only have 11 grades instead of 12. So I started university when I was like 16 and 17, and I started drawing, and I feel like I was always kind of like good at drawing, and these were some of my initial like sketches. These didn't have any meaning other than the fact that they're all women, but I feel like back then I was just practicing my skills. And I wasn't very aware of what illustration was. For me, I was like just drawing. And so for me, this was just like fine art, let's say, but everyone kept calling it kind of like illustration. I feel like it does have that look. But as time started going, I started using my art in my undergrad career just to deliver messages. I've always been inspired by political art and people like Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger and the Guerrilla Girls. So I tried incorporating text and messaging into my work. And I became a vegetarian when I was 15, and I was like a very rebellious child. So I was like very much like trying to put this into everyone's faces, which I now in like retrospect, I realized it wasn't probably like the best approach. But I decided to incorporate this in my artwork. And so this is super early, like probably 2010. But on the left, there's like this kind of like monster, in a way satirizing the meat industry. So it's kind of like a hybrid of like different animals that people consume. So it would be like a mix between like chicken and pork and cows, just like poking fun at it. I often feel like humor also like lets people let their guard down to receive messages. So that's what I was trying to do there. And on the right, that was like some of my first tries at printmaking. So these are etchings in which I redesigned Colombian bills and replaced some of the people that they usually have, like historical figures, for animals. And so they read, it doesn't have a price, like life cannot be estimated, and that kind of thing. I wish I had documented it better, and I don't know if I still have these, but yeah, this was some of my early work. So I did 2 years there. Undergrads are usually 5 years, but when I was 19, I moved to the US. And so while I was like um, figuring out my immigration status, there were 2 years in which I wasn't going to school. And during that time, I started working, creating work for myself, but I was definitely craving that like peer-to-peer review and critique sessions. So I went back to school and I started, I kind of like transferred my credits and started in FIU, which is Florida International University. And that is not an art school, it's more like a big state school in Florida. So usually their focus was like international relations and political science. And so all their art like studios were like in the parking lot, like basically was a career that they paid less attention to, which I feel it's often what happens with big universities. But since I was already a little bit older, I was 19 when I started, 19 or 20 when I started going, went back to my undergrad. I feel like I was already started developing my voice, and I started playing with ceramics, which I definitely fell in love with. So this is some of my earlier work as well. I want to continue this series for sure. And the only reason I don't do as much ceramics now is just because I mean, it is such a like time consuming like practice, and you need to have like a kiln and all those things. So, but that's definitely something I want to look back, go back to. I also around that time got a digital tablet and started drawing. And again, these drawings didn't have much meaning. They were just like practice. And I feel like at the time, you usually get drilled in school that you have to have like a meaning for everything you do. But I think having just like mindless practice is also like really helpful in trying to figure out like what you like to do. And I mean, these were not supposed to be like high pieces of art. This was just like my sketches. And I also that's when I fell in love with painting. And so this is a series which I think still is like my favorite project, because I'm pretty much an introvert and I'm not that type of person that likes to be like in front of the camera or like drawn too much attention to themselves. But for this series, I did decided to paint 13 self-portraits. Some of them were more conceptual and some of them were more like literal. Um, but those were dealing kind of like all the pressures of like identity, both like as a female and like as an immigrant, like having to try to figure out who you are or what you're expected to be. So they're kind of like distorted faces or multiple faces. And these are some more of that series. There's one behind me right now. And they're all like in different sizes. So the way I wanted to install them was to have them all together, kind of like a picture wall where they're all like mismatched sizes, but keeping the palette consistent. And so while I was doing this work, as expected, I got comments of people being like, oh, you paint yourself too much. And I felt that judgment. And so my latest, the last one of that series was this kind of like yet another self-portrait painting, which was the biggest one of them all. Kind of like just questioning that, because I feel like throughout history and art history, we see a lot of like people, like especially men, doing a lot of self-portraits. I mean, there's so many like Rembrandt self-portraits and Van Gogh self-portraits, and like in no way at all I'm comparing myself to them, but I'm just saying that no one like critiques them as being like vain or like too self-absorbed. So this was kind of like my response to that. And again, I was going back to typography, not knowing much about graphic design. So now having like a design education, I can see like a lot of things going on here that would probably like be a need to be addressed. But I felt like this was just like a good way for me to express myself. And around that time, I was posting everything on my Tumblr. Tumblr is dead now. I feel like not a lot of people use it. And I didn't have a website, but just I was like pretty much posting everything. Didn't have like any high standards of what I was posting. But I would recommend you all to do that, to put your work out there, even if it's not perfect, because I feel like it's never going to be perfect. And if you wait for it to be perfect to put it out there, then I mean, you're going to be waiting for a long time. So I was posting basically everything. And I got an email from the art director for Lenny Letter. And back then I was like a huge Lena Dunham fan. It was like around the time of Girls, and the newsletter was pretty new. And I was so excited. I mean, this art director had contacted me and they wanted to pay me to create like 5 drawings for like an issue of like a special issue of the newsletter. And basically throughout my career, my education, I hadn't really considered how I was going to make money after graduation. I feel like that's very common with art careers. Like you don't go into it thinking about like, oh, the job that you're gonna get after or how you're gonna make money. You just do it because you love it. So this basically opened like a huge door for me to like get involved into illustration. I later realized you usually have to like reach out to art directors or put more work out there. But this was just like, I feel like she trusted me a lot. And I look at these early illustrations and I don't see much. I see like they were not up to standard, but I guess she just saw my personal work, what I was doing about like more like political issues and like female identity and like feminism, and she saw like the kind of like connection. So it's another point to be made that you get the work that you put out there. So if you're very much into, I don't know, fashion design, then you do a lot of fashion art, then you're probably going to get contacted by those type of clients. So um, some of these illustrations, the first one that you see on the top left was about immigration, and it was an interview between Marisa Franco and Agent Poe, which are both immigration activists, and it was dealing about the immigration crisis in Arizona and Sheriff Joe Arpaio, which since then went to prison, and then since then, later recently Trump pardoned him, which was really sad to see. But I worked on all of this before that happened. The second illustration deals with like sexuality and religion. Third one with like a woman's journey through like her Me Too movement, but also like connecting with her mother in that sense that her mother also had experienced that, like those type of like harassments and issues that were not so much talked about. The fourth one is about like women's exams and how doctors can usually like abuse women, and because like women trust their doctors, a lot of that abuse goes unnoticed. So all of these kind of have like those very like serious and important undertones, and I just wanted to, I fell in love with illustration in that sense of being able to put images to words that matter and like for topics that I can relate to and topics that I think are important. So with that, because of my work was put out there, I was also getting more commissions from different publications. So this is something I did for Red Bull Music Academy. Again, like a super interesting story about like a musician that basically faked his identity, and like a white musician that made himself like passes Latino in LA to play music, and this was back like in the 60s. It's like a very crazy story. No one knows where he is now, if he died or like if he's hiding. But I wanted for these to give that nostalgic feel and also like that magical feel. So I started incorporating more and more animation into my illustrations. And animation can often feel like daunting if you think of like Disney movies or Pixar movies, right? But like I feel like even just like a tiny glare or like a tiny blink or just like the slightest movement can bring some magic to still images. And well, I graduated, I kept painting for myself. Uh, as the intro mentioned, I've shown work here and there. This was a series about identity again, but just like how we portray identity on how like the way we dress and how much you can infer about a person if you take other identifiers like gender and race and age and just like look at how they're presenting themselves. And I also wanted to keep pushing my skills because for my self-portrait series, it was mostly focusing on the figure, but kind of like left the space blank. So it was mostly like flat colors for the background. So for this one, for this series, I wanted to focus more on like the space and leave the figure out of it. And so I kept doing this, getting like freelance commissions for illustration, but I also realized that I kind of like was missing that art school education because my education had been fragmented, 2 years in Colombia and then 2 years here, but in a state school that wasn't like so much like art focused. I realized I wanted to go back to grad school. And I had moved to Maryland then, and MICA was like pretty close, and it's like a really good school. So I was like, oh great, I'm gonna go to MICA. And when I started researching it, because of my different practice, I wasn't sure which program to go to. And so when I was talking to the admissions advisor, he was like, yeah, I don't think we've ever had someone apply to like 4 programs. So and he was like, I'm not sure how that's gonna look, because I mean, for most people, when you go to grad school, you're like super sure that that's what you want to do. And I knew I wanted to go to grad school for art, but like I wasn't sure which area. And so I look at these 4 different programs, and the Mount Royal School of Art is a multidisciplinary art program. So that sounded like super cool to me. But when I look at the work from graduating students, it was like mostly like performance art and like audio visual, like video and experimental like installations. And I love that kind of art and I love to interact with it, but that's not the type of art that I make. So I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. And then painting, painting is something that I'm always gonna do and that I'm in love with. Uh, but again, the artwork was more like targeted towards abstract art, and I felt like I was already painting. Same with illustration practice, because I was already getting clients and I was already getting commissions. I felt like I don't know if I was gonna get that much out of it. So I decided to go with the area that I knew the least about, and that was graphic design. I didn't have like a background in design, and my portfolio wasn't that strong. I even included that painting, that huge like another self-portrait painting in my portfolio, and I was like kind of like pretty sure I was not gonna get accepted, but I did, which was great. So I decided to go with graphic design because also the program was very open. So you have like your main classes and then you have a bunch of electives. And so my plan going in was like, I'm just gonna do the required design studio classes, and then for electives I'm gonna do like painting, ceramic, all those like different things. But then I got into it and I fell in love with graphic design. And so there's this project that I've been super inspired since the first time I learned about it, by the Yes Men. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're a group of artists, and they created a fake New York Times. They literally like copied it exactly, but all the news were kind of like switched to be positive. So it was like the Iraq War ends, and like there's a maximum wage set for CEOs, and like national healthcare is a thing. So they distributed these newspapers to people, and like just seeing there's videos around if you want to look at them, but just seeing like how people reacted to that, like all those positive news. And I was like, this is like what I love about art, like how interactive it was delivering a message, um, and it was delivered through design methods. So I decided for my first grad school project, kind of like my first self-initiated grad school project, to create a newspaper coming off that theme of animal rights, basically what I was doing back then, like in 2010, but bringing it to the next level. And so I designed this newspaper, and I wrote some of the news, and I illustrated the little like the little drawings that go with it. And the idea is that this is a newspaper from an alternate world in which animals are not the like animals are the leading species and humans are the ones that are like treated like animals, basically how we treat animals. So it's basically just switching the roles. And it deals a lot with animal rights. So for example, here on the left there's like this news about human activists protesting like human mistreatment. And so kind of like playing with also what PETA does, saying that they would rather be naked than wear skin. um, Same like a campaign that PETA does. And this universe was set around a milk kind of like businessman, to kind of like Jeff Bezos of the meat industry in a way, which is this cat that you see here at the bottom. And in this newspaper, there's an interview with him about his practice where he tries to be like, oh no, but we treat our humans really, really well. Like basically, I feel like that's usually what the meat industry says about their animals. Like, oh no, but these are like well treated and things like that. So this was my my approach to kind of like deliver a message, but at the same time not make it super preachy or like judgmental, just like a fun little way. And I also was able to have a lot of fun with it because I included like a lot of contemporary references, not necessarily related to like animal rights, but just like even the art world. So for example, here's like a Damien Hirst type of art from like one of the artists in that world. Um, and also like around that time, Gucci announced that they were banning fur from their collection. So yeah, a design house in this universe is banning skin. And not everything was super serious. Like around that time also, um, First Man by Damien Chazelle like premiered. That's the movie with Ryan Gosling of like the first men then that go to the moon. So I was kind of like shifting and taking those kind of things for my newspaper. Um, and of course I had to do a photo shoot, and I also designed like a milk carton. So the front page of the newspaper was like some missing kids, like puppies and kittens and things like that. So in the milk carton, one of them is also featured, and of course that's human milk. Um, so yeah, this was a project I was able to use like a lot of my different skills. I was able to practice my typography skills, but also like keep my passion for drawing and also like delivering a message. And something that I want to more still is write. I Writing is not my strongest skill, but that's something that I definitely want to keep like pushing. So this allowed me to do that with a lot of text. And I feel like I don't expect people when they have this in their hands to read the whole thing, because I feel like also no one really reads like an entire newspaper. You just read like the areas that you're interested in, but I feel like there's enough Easter eggs everywhere for people to get something out of it. So yeah, that would be the first project that I'm going to share with you. Second one is my thesis project for my MFA. Um, so Mountain Mother and Other Stories was something I decided to do because throughout my design education, and I think it's pretty similar in the art world, but it's way so more hyphened in the design arena, and is that a lot of the influences and a lot of the respected like design comes from a very small part of the world. A lot of it comes either from Europe, some of it from the US, but it's very much like super white centric. And I mean, I feel like basically a goal for a lot of designers is just like Swiss minimalism, and like Helvetica is like the like pinnacle of design. So for this, I wanted to create a world for a folk story from Colombia, but making all the design considerations to make it very much endemic to Colombia. So Mountain Mother is the story of a kind of like a monster that hunts hunters and people who like mistreat the environment. And so she is like a bad person or bad monster because she kills humans in that folktale. But at the same time, she's kind of like doing it for a good reason. So I took that folktale and kind of like rewrote it to be a little bit more from her vision too, like from her eyes. And also because at that time I was very inspired about getting these stories known. I realized that I grew up watching like Cinderella and Rapunzel, and that all of those tales had origins from Germany, like from folk tales from Germany that the Brother Grimms had like collected. And so I felt like we are so influenced by those stories that often the stories from our own people are like left untold. So that's what I wanted to do with it. It being a design program, I decided I wanted to design a typeface. And it is a typeface that it is not the easiest to read, but it is inspired by the plants from Colombia, and kind of like take Mountain Mother as an inspiration. So that was part of it. A lot of my inspiration was also magic realism, which is a literary current that is very much associated with Latin America and writers like Garcia Marquez and Isabel Allende. And so I wanted to bring a sense of magic to the design that I was doing. So through animation, like here, and augmented reality, I wanted to accomplish that. So this is the little book with the story I wrote and I illustrated, and the book is handmade. So the dimension is a little odd. I wanted to keep it like landscape and have the illustrations interact with the text. And I wanted also to be kind of like become a sculpture on its own. So when you open the book in a different way, it kind of like becomes like this huge like object that has like, it's a flag book basically that has Mountain Mother on one side and a little monkey that's part of the story on the other end. And for this book, I designed seamless patterns for like the end papers and designed like patterns for the book cloth that was gonna go over it. So it was kind of like a tedious like process, but I always wanted to make a book, so at least I got that out of it. And I also wanted to create a sculpture for Mountain Mother, and I felt like I hadn't been painting as much, and I was missing it. So I decided to laser cut some of the plants that are endemic to Colombia, and then paint them, laser cut them, and create the sculpture. And as you see, Mountain Mother has like holes in her eyes, because going back to that magic aspect, I wanted her, when she's installed, I wanted her to blink. So I left that space to put a screen behind her so she could like move her eyes when she's like completely installed. And these are some of the plants that I took inspiration from for creating her. Around this time, a new book came out about Jose Celestino Mutis. Um, and the book is new, but these illustrations are very, very old, from colonial times. And Jose Celestino Mutis is like a scientist, and he and his team went to Colombia and Ecuador, and they did a bunch of botanical illustrations of the plants that they saw there. They brought those back to Spain, and he's a very renowned figure. Even our botanical garden in Colombia is named after him. Um, but I feel like it's only until very recent that figures like that are being put in question, just like the role in colonization. So in a way, I wanted to take that beautiful work that him and his team did, but that I feel like has such a like dark history surrounding it, and like adapt them for Mountain Mother. So some of the flowers, some of the plants that you see here ended up being part of the sculpture. And going back to the aspect of magic, I also wanted to make this an augmented reality sculpture. So here on the right, you can see the eyes, and I started playing with new software, Cinema 4D and Unity, to create that experience through an app. So here you can see some of how it looks when it moves, when you see it through a screen. The sculpture activates the augmented reality part, and some like scanned paintings that were turned into digital objects move through it. And this is like another view of the book. Sadly, because of COVID, our grad show was canceled. I was able to put it up for documentation purposes only, but this is kind of like how the world looks. I kept making like little sculptures. I made the table, and more laser cut figures coming from the ceiling. So that's my thesis. And I feel like there's so many different folk tales something that I still want to keep exploring, maybe down the road. There's so many other tales that are worth telling that I feel like also have like positive lessons to them. So the third big project that I want to talk about was the Women's March. I worked with them in 2019 for the march that year, and that's the first time I worked with them. And I feel like then I felt like everything had to be very serious. I work as part of a team, and we were like, the agenda items were very serious, like immigration, police reform, environmental rights. But so the banners ended up looking like a little bit more somber and darker and like very serious looking. So for this march, we definitely wanted to make it more celebratory and kind of like bring more attention to it, which is why these banners look like this. I worked as part of a team led by Rose Jaffe. She's in the back there with Chelsea Reiter Sorner, Crystal Clarity, and Angel. And they are all linked on my website if you want to go later, like check their work out, because they're incredible artists and muralists. And so the five of us, we had the task to create the front of March banner for the march, and all the other banners and like different art to go through for the march. And they're incredible painters and muralists. And I was more like of the designer on that role. So I was in charge of like typography and designing these banners. And so, yeah, this is kind of like how they looked. The budget for the march that year was a little smaller. So instead of printing them, we had a lot of help from volunteers, which was really nice to get the community involved, because it proves that sometimes you cannot do everything by yourself. So when you're dealing with something that is larger scale, like the Women's March, like having the help from your community is very important. And we had like community days where people would come and paint, and all of these 25-foot wide banners would be laid outside, and people, it was kind of like paint by numbers. We just like projected and traced them, and so people would know like, okay, the R is yellow, so filling in with yellow. And we were able to accomplish everything. So this is how it looks on the day off. um, it's pretty nice. I'm very glad we went with bright colors. I feel like it is a different look for protest art, which often feels a little darker. Um, and we also wanted to create like beautiful paintings to have them as flags in the march. And so we divided the task, and Crystal worked on the first one for reproductive justice. I worked on the center one for environmental justice, and Rose worked on the one on the left for immigration rights. And we wanted, again, these to be like very much paintings, so not just like signs or protest art, which often feels like a little bit more rushed given like the circumstances that you have to like deliver a message clearly. But we wanted these to be actually fully like detailed render paintings. And this is how they looked on the day of the march. We sadly had to cut holes on them because the wind was so strong that it was kind of like pulling people down, like back. So it was really sad to have to cut them all, but I mean, it had to be done, unfortunately. um and we also made these into screen, like we took some of the detail out and made them into screen print posters to hand to people on the day of the march. So again, I was in charge of like, I did the illustration for the environmental justice and the typography. So looking back, I am very glad I did my design program, just because I felt like I was able to push those typography skills that are often important when you want to convey messages. So that's pretty much like 3 big projects that I wanted to share with you. But I'm also going to share some of more like the day-to-day stuff that I do, because those projects are so time consuming, and a lot of those are self-initiated. So it's not something that happens like on a day-to-day basis. So on a day-to-day basis, what I do is mostly illustration. And I like to divide that into 3 main categories. So the first one is commercial illustration, which is what I do for clients that are not tied to like articles or text. So the second one is freelance editorial, which is what I do for, yeah, probably like mostly like publications like New York Times and the Washington Post, and it's mostly tied to news or articles. And the third one is what I do in-house in my job as an editorial designer, which is also similar to freelance editorial, but just done in-house. And even for the commercial work and for the editorial work, a lot of what you get is what you put out there. So all of the projects, or most of them that I've been working on, are very much identity-based, even if it's done for brands. So this is a project that was launched recently that I did for HBO Max as part of a larger team. They are launching a new initiative, HBO Max Palante, which is their Latinx vertical, kind of like for older shows. And so they wanted to create an animation, and they had a manifesto of what they stand for. And so they divided that manifesto into 4 parts, and hired 4 different animators, all Latinx animators, to illustrate and animate them. And so in the next slide, I'm going to show you what I did. To watch the whole video again, you can go to my site to see how it all connects. So yeah, I'm gonna.
Palante is not one thing. It's not one color or one race. It's not just Spanish or Portuguese or English or Creole. Palante is not one flag or a line on a map. Palante is about refusing to be who we were supposed to be.
And so I am an illustrator and I dabbled in animation, but I'm not so much like an animator per se. So this was like a very interesting challenge, and it made me realize that basically if you can draw and you can paint, you can animate. It will take a bit longer, but um, it's not as like hard as it looks. It's just time consuming. So yeah, if some of you are interested in animation, I know you have an animation program. It's just like putting in the time, but other than that, yeah. And so this was a commercial project, and as you can see, like these colors are very different to what I usually do, and it's because like for commercial, you usually have to work with the brand, and those projects are a bit longer and they have more like revisions, and I had to work with brand colors for this one. The next one was done for Honda, the car company. For Hispanic Heritage Month, they wanted to create something, again, hiring Latinx artists to create, to illustrate some of the values that the company has. And so I work with the Respect one. Again, very simple animation, but I think just like even the slightest animation can bring like a sense of magic. And all commercial work, or at least what I consider commercial, is not done just like for big brands. This is something I did for the city of Cleveland and the Cleveland Foundation and their RTA, which is like their metro line, through Land Studio. And this was an illustration that I did to kind of like represent one of the books that had been awarded the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards, and the book was by Peter Ho Davies, called The Fortunes, and it dealt with like different Chinese American characters and their experiences through different generations, which unfortunately I feel like it's even more relevant now with all the horrible stuff that we've been seeing happening in the news. And so for this one, I kind of like looked back at my self-portraits that also dealt with identity. And I used one of my friends. She's Chinese American, and she's also a writer, and she's actually like a huge fan of the writer of the book. So it was like a perfect match, and use her like as my model. And so the one in the middle, it's her actual self, like how she presents herself. And then surrounding her, there are many very different versions of her. Some of like what she's expected to be, like from her family or from society. Others like some like even stereotypes or things like she sees herself as. And that illustration was installed in the metro line, so for people to see during their commutes. And I think it was just like pretty cool, because I feel like during commuting time you don't often get to see a lot of art. So that was, yeah, that's it for that. And I'm going to show you some of my even more everyday work. So for freelance editorial illustration, these are some of the clients I've worked with. These are usually super fast paced. So I often get an email from an art director. They give me the draft, the deadline, and the deadline is usually super short. So I send sketches like 2 or 3 days after. Then they select one, and then I work on the final and give it back to them like a couple of days after. What I really like about freelance editorial illustration is that you can have a drawing in your computer, like, and see it printed the next week on the newspaper, which I think is pretty cool. So this is something I did for Texas Monthly about an article that was dealing with voter suppression and what would elections be like if everyone came in. And voter suppression often targets people of color. So I wanted to represent kind of like a sense of unity and everyone being here voting. This is an illustration I did for the Washington Post about kind of like diversity tokenism and how these Black writers felt that they were often hired just to kind of like check that box. But and this ran in the newspaper like this, and some of the portraits were used for quotes. And again, it's something like super magical about seeing your work printed. And working in editorial illustration also allows me to not be as precious about my work, because before I usually like to have everything like super high quality printed, like a giclée print with archival paper. But when you see your work in a newspaper, it's I mean, the printing quality is as good as a newspaper can be. So kind of like humbles you down, but it's also like super nice to see like how many people are gonna see that. This was one for the New York Times about a record label that was dealing with issues. They kind of like re-released songs from a long time ago, and a lot of those were racist just because also of the time. So they were dealing with either they censor history and not include them, or they put them out and put out like hate speech into the world again. So it was kind of like a very complicated topic. And at the end, I think they decided just to keep blank, like that space of the song blank, because they didn't want to just like put those messages into the world again. So a lot of sometimes those a lot of difficult subjects to work with, and I often try to make those even like look appealing. I feel like bright colors often contrast with the darkness of the subject, so I've been playing with that a lot. Not everything has to be like super dark though, but something I like about editorial illustration is that you often get similar briefs and you have to approach them in a different way. So lately I've been doing a lot of like vaccine related things and COVID related things. But this is a portrait I did for the New Yorker for Selena, and this was around when the Netflix series was coming out. And then a couple of months after, I did this one for Texas Monthly, and this was also about Selena, but it was more about her as a person, and like how the writer was talking about like because she died so young, she didn't get to like in quote unquote like disappoint that like her audience. So people have Selena like this pedestal, but at the same time, um, unconditional love is what happens when you often like forgive mistakes. But yeah, so just like different ways of approaching a similar subject. And here's some of my process and sketches. I always try to be very open with sketching because when I was starting out, I didn't know what a sketch should look like. I was super afraid because I was like, maybe this is not good enough. So my earlier sketches are were more like complete than my current sketches. And I feel like that's okay. Our directors just want to see the idea, so sketches don't have to be perfect as long as they get the idea across. And it's usually good not to spend too much on them because then you fall in love with an idea and they don't pick that one, and it's like, oh, you spent all that time. But I usually have all of these again and post them for people to see, to know that things also start looking not great. And these last three illustrations are part of like editorial illustration, but they're a little different in the sense that they're not tied to an article. These are part of the Washington Post magazine, and they have a section called Art with a Point, in which they commission different artists and they just give like a brief. So for this case, it was like the inauguration. And the artist gets to write a little short paragraph about what it means to them and draw basically whatever they want. The art direction for this one is a little bit more limited. So it is kind of like a nice mix between editorial illustration and personal work. So yeah, this for the inauguration, I titled like A Time to Repair, just because I felt like it was also around the time that the insurrection happened in the Capitol. So everything was like broken. So even though I know that a new administration wasn't not going to fix everything, it was at least going to make some change. This was for the anniversary of the pandemic, so what their March issue. And I'm going to show you next a preview. That one hasn't been published yet, but it will be out this Sunday in the magazine. So if you get the Washington Post, just look out for it. The theme for this one was vaccines, and so how I felt like after months of literal and also like actual darkness, and like with COVID and all that, it felt like a new beginning in a way, hopefully. And lastly, I currently work as an editorial designer and illustrator at today.com, which is part of NBC News. So this is some of what I do on a daily basis. These even have like a shorter turnaround just because we get the brief and sometimes it's just same day or the day after. And because of that reason also, I've been experimenting more with a new technique, which is photo collaging. And I'm super excited about the possibilities of this and like adding it to my toolbox and maybe mixing it with drawn illustrations. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katty. That was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. So I think we now have time for questions. Also, feel free to ask any questions. If you've seen some of my work that I didn't include here, just like, yeah, feel free to ask anything.
Yeah, okay, everyone, go ahead and type out your questions in the chat, and Lily will go ahead and take that over.
Hi, sorry, I'm trying to remove Katty as my pin so I can see everyone. And for some reason, my computer's not listening to me. Yeah. I apologize. One moment.
I'm gonna go back to a different slide to have like a better image while we talk.
Appreciate that. And thank you so much. It's really, really nice to start getting some new kinds of artists in here, because I mean, as long as I've been here, I haven't been able to attend an artist lecture quite like yours. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. So let's get started taking some questions. And again, you guys are free to send them in as you think of them, and I will try to get to all of them. So the first is actually from Jill. And she said, it's so amazing to see how seamlessly you switch between different media and have everything look so cohesive. Have you found that working one medium influences another? For example, working in digital media influences your traditional painting?
Yeah, for sure. So when I was starting, since I had like both of my loves, like I was exploring with digital illustration and drawing, but I was also painting analog. I was like really freaked out that they didn't look like cohesive and that people wouldn't be able to like recognize my work if they saw it on a different medium. But I feel like I kind of let go of that worry, and for some reason they started looking more and more like the same. I think I do see like the connection and how they're working together, and I'm very excited about that they're starting to look more like cohesive. And I take what I learned from different mediums and incorporate them into the other. So for example, with digital illustration, even though working on them is very different, I realized that to make some things pop, I use a lot of like yellow highlights and like blue highlights, and that's something that I'm now incorporating in my painting. And I feel like, yeah, they inform like each other. So yeah, I'm very excited about seeing that progress, because at the beginning it wasn't like that.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is from Amy. She first wanted to say that your scope of work is beautiful and wonderful. And she was wondering how you find your projects. Do companies contact you, or do you go to places to find work? And also, thank you for your presentation.
Well, thank you so much. So as I mentioned, my first kind of like official commission came from Lenny Letter. So I would advise you to put all your work. I think now Instagram is a huge way how I get work. And a lot of art directors also look at hashtags. And so I know they're sometimes like annoying and like you don't want to see them in post, but that helps too. So most of my work has been people reaching out to me, but there has been times where I've reached out to people as well. If there's an art director or someone that I really want to work with, and I feel like the styles align, I reach out to them. So my first commission that I got for the Washington Post, I actually reached out to them, to this art director, and now she moved from the newspaper to the magazine, and I kept working with her on a continuous basis, and she's the one that art directs Art with a Point. So I kind of like collaborate with them every so often, and I feel like you can reach out, and you should definitely should, just like a short email and like maybe a link to your portfolio, and include some samples. But it's also important for you to like not reach to everyone, because not everyone is gonna be a match. So try to research who kind of like has like a similar style, or is commissioning people that have similar work to yours. And yeah.
Thank you. And Nicole said that she loves your work, Woofker Post newspaper, your Woofker Post newspaper project, and she was curious if you distributed any copies of your newspaper, and if so, how do people respond to it?
So I did at school. So that was exhibited at school, and people were free to take copies. And I think the response was pretty good. I feel like I've only heard this from one person, but one of my classmates said he like stopped eating meat, which was like a huge victory for me. I mean, just the fact that an art project can have impact, and that I still wanna like distribute it more. I wanna like have it print, and I would like to give it out for free. That would be like ideal. So but I'll keep you posted. But yeah, I think the response is often like it is very crude in that some like there's some humans kind of like being slaughtered or in cages or and things like that, but I try to make it also kind of sweet. I mean, the illustration is like very childlike, the colors are like pink and yellow, so it's not super dark, because I also don't want to put people off, you know, when I feel like um when you see a lot of like PETA stuff, right, that's super graphic, and I don't think that's getting the point across. Like you're just pushing people away. So I wanted things to be approachable and be fun too. Like there's a lot of like tiny jokes and little things here and there that make people laugh.
Thank you. I'm really hoping I pronounced this next person's name right. I believe it's Yvonne, Ivonne, I believe. I apologize if I mispronounced it. But they say, "Hi, Katty, your work is so beautiful. And as an editorial artist, how did you begin your career? Did it evolve? Did it involve a lot of emails? What are some advice that you would give to someone trying to make more editorial work?"
Perfect. So the first thing would be, I don't know how far in your portfolio you are, but I think the first thing would be to create work. If you haven't gotten any clients yet, just give yourself your briefs basically and figure out what you're into, right? Like I'm very much, I do love a lot of like social justice and like women's rights and things like that. So a lot of my work before getting my commissions was like that. So that's what our directors see that what I do, and they commission me based on that. So if you have an interest, you don't have to know like everything or draw everything. There's a lot of incredible illustrators that, for example, don't do people, right? Like they don't do figures because it doesn't go with their style. So I would advise just to first kind of like figure out what you like, what you would like to draw. Like some people are super into like tech or food, right? So if you want to be like a food illustration and illustrate for food articles, then create work on that and then post it everywhere. Don't, it doesn't matter if it's not perfect or if you're like, oh, it's not as good as I would like it to be. You don't know who's gonna see it. And yeah, third one would be reach out, go to publications that you see kind of like have similar styles. And often magazines have like mastheads with like their art directors. But another thing that I do, and I do this in a way also to like help people out, like the same way I put my sketches, I usually tag the art directors in all my commissions. So you can go, and if you're like, oh, she did this, I just posted one for Wire, for example, like, oh, I'm really into tech illustration and this art director does that. So you can go to like their Instagram. I wouldn't advise to DM them or reach out to them via Instagram. That's useful for you to get their names and maybe like Google them, try to find their email, and then reach out to them via email. For the most part, I've heard that they do not like getting DMs, so don't do that. But yeah, reach out, and don't be discouraged if you don't hear back. Now that I'm working from home and I've been spending a lot of time here, I've been listening to tons of podcasts of illustrators, and a lot of them just reach out and then they hear back in a year. I mean, sometimes our directors have to wait for you for like the perfect project for you. So just keep sending emails. It doesn't matter if they don't reply.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next is from Ashley, and they said, "COVID has really changed the landscape of how artists work. Did working more virtually have a positive impact on your practice?
So I think, I feel like maybe, I mean, again, I'm a super introvert and I have my studio in my house. So I've had more time to work for sure. Um, just because I feel like I'm also like, this is not a good thing. I'm not trying to like, um, I don't know, like idolize the hustle or anything like that, but I do feel very anxious if I'm not working. Like it's very difficult for me to just like relax, and this is not a good thing. But again, being at home, uh I've had a lot of time to work, and I've been able to do more personal work, start like repainting, like painting more and doing things that I like more. But also because there's no commute time, right? That gives more time for like different projects, and I'm very lucky in my that I get to like as my full-time job, a job that I really like, and that the team is amazing. But I also get I don't have to do like a lot of extra hours or overtime, so I also get that time to do extra work that I want to do. So I guess in that way it has helped, but it also like takes some mental toll on you. I feel like I've been lucky in the sense that COVID has not affected me personally. Like I haven't not gotten it and my family is healthy. But just the fact that knowing that the world is going through such a hard situation, it's really like mentally draining. So yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. And this is from Clarissa. She says she loves your work. And she was wondering what digital technology and software you use to create your illustrations and animations.
So it is a mix of everything. I started using Photoshop. I actually started using ArtRage, which was like a free software that came with my Wacom tablet, and that did for the time. Then I switched to Photoshop, which has way more capabilities, and so it's a little harder to manage that because it can do so many things that you can get lost with it. Um, but now I do most of my illustrations and sketching on my iPad Pro and Procreate. And then when I'm done with that, I send it to Photoshop. And in Photoshop, I kind of like adjust colors and like maybe add like textures or noise or like a paper overlay. But I think you it's great that you're interested about it, but also like any software can do. Like I started with a free software, and there's so many like free software out there like Krita and some other like painting tools.
Awesome, thank you. And our last question, but we still have more time. So if anybody really does have anything that they would like to ask, now's the time. But our last question is from River. And they say that the editorial work is difficult due to deadlines. And how do you maintain your creativity and motivation to produce work on such a fast-paced schedule?
Um, I I love working, so I feel like it's it comes easy to me, I guess, to like work on tight deadlines because of what I was saying prior. I'm super anxious, so in that sense, it keeps me like going. But at the same time, I've been more selective with the work that I do. So let's say if I get an illustration assignment and the topic is not something that I'm like particularly passionate about, and it doesn't always have to be something that I'm like all like super passionate about, but if it's something that I'm like, I do not feel it that much, then I would let that one go. Because I feel like with editorial, something that's really, really cool is that you also get to learn a lot of new things about the world just because every article is different and you have to read different articles about different topics. So usually when the articles are engaging, I feel like that's easy in the sense that at least I am excited about creating new work for that. But that's why it's important for you to kind of like put out there what you want so you get what you want, right? You don't get things that, like, if I got an illustration, I don't know, I keep saying cars, but if I got an illustration about like cars, I'm not that into that, so I'm probably not gonna be as excited about doing it, or I may even pass on it.
Thank you. Actually, so we have another question, which is exactly what I was going to ask Jill. She was wondering if you were ever formally taught about the business of illustration and commissions work, or did you pick it up as along the way? And do you have any resources or recommendations about the nitty gritty, like contracts, deadlines? Yeah, I guess I had the same question just because I had to learn on my own selling my work through Instagram and learning how to say no and that I can say no, and my prices and stuff like that. So I was also wondering how you navigate that whole side of it.
Yeah, I feel like I've been to 3 different universities, like in Colombia, then FIU, and then MICA, and like none of them had taught me anything about pricing or how you handle that. And it's been like a trial and error. I feel like I've undercharged so many times. I've undercharged to a point that I've charged what I think it's fair, and then people are like, "Oh, let's throw an extra $1,000." Just and I feel like, oh, I should have done way more. But so it is. I've been reading about it. I feel like more and more people are being more honest about it, and I also try to pay it forward. So if you ever have questions, any of you, like, you can reach out to me and ask me, and I've done that too with people that I've, like, some of my friends that I feel like have had more experience, or have worked with clients that I have not worked. I can reach out and be like, hey, how much do you charge for this? um, there's also like resources. There's a Twitter page. There's like a website called Rate Finder that's mostly for like commercial work. And it is like an anonymous Excel sheet where it has the rates for different what different publications pay, and like how the experience was. So for example, someone could be like, oh, I work for this publication, they pay me like $1,000 for this. The art director was great to work with. And then another one could be like, oh, they pay me $500 and it was horrible. Or so you can kind of like get a sense with that. I know there's a book which has a really long name. I think it's like the artist guidebook to pricing. And I'll, like, if you contact me, I can probably send you that link. And that one includes a lot of pricing resources, because pricing art is super hard, and I feel like no one teaches you that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. It's really nice. I feel like during these times, people are starting to become more transparent and it's become less stigmatized. So we can all actually get paid equally and fairly.
And because art is so isolated, it's hard, because if you work at a company, or I don't know, like you have like unions and things like that could help you out, but artists are like pretty much isolated. So I think it's very important to kind of like pay it forward and like help each other, and like not see each other as competition, but more like as, like, if we help keep the standards up for everyone, that's at the end gonna also benefit you. It's not good for you if someone is undercharging and then that drops the rate, like the industry rates down.
Awesome. So our last question wrapping up is also from Clarissa. And you mentioned that you had a bunch of illustration podcasts that you were listening to. And if you could tell us what you're listening to, or maybe even just drop it in the chat box so people can copy and paste it to listen to later.
Yeah, so there's 2 illustration ones that are super, super good. One is called the Illustration Hour. And that one goes like pretty much into like, how did you find your clients? And like people are like, oh, I emailed them. It's super detailed. And the other one is called The Friendly Unknown. And the host also interviews illustrators. And there's another one which I really love, called Design Matters, and that one's hosted by Debbie Millman, and she interviews all types of creatives. So not only designers and illustrators, but also like writers, painters, filmmakers, and she's like incredible at interviewing. Like, she does all this research. So those are 3 of my favorites. Once I stop sharing, I can probably drop it in the chat for you all.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, if anybody else doesn't have any more questions, I guess this concludes our final visiting artist program of the spring semester. I'm sorry, I forget where I am sometimes. And Katty, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I can throw it back to Marley to conclude our lecture.
Thanks, Lily. Yeah, so if anybody doesn't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and conclude. Thank you all for attending this week's Visiting Artist Lecture Program with Katty. We hope you enjoyed today's lecture, and we look forward to seeing you again in the summer. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.